Now, in the first video, we looked at some basic concepts like the grid and the inhabited wall. And we said these might be the kinds of concepts that you're expected to start understanding and working with when you start out in college. We also said that when you're starting on a project, let's say, you would be expected to come up with a concept, let's say like a grid, and maybe to somehow marry that or combine it with a view or an idea that you have about a site. So that, for example, a concept, let's say a grid, plus an idea about the site, let's say taking advantage of a very nice view of a lake, that those two things together would become the starting point for your project. Now, none of this is in any way controversial. This is pretty much standard stuff, and every school in every part of the world is going to take this kind of approach. There is something slightly unsatisfactory about it from my point of view, and it is this. I think that it arrives a little bit too quickly at an architectural solution when a little bit more design exploration might be possible. For example, if I'm designing a small house on a site beside a lake, which happens to be my front garden, I might decide to take advantage of the view, organize my spaces with a very basic tartan grid, and then put the relaxing area or the sitting area in what we would call the served space, and the bathroom and the kitchenette and those kinds of service spaces in the zone that Louis Kahn might refer to as the servant area. Well, I might just stop right there and think the project is done. I've already come up with the architecture, and all I have to do now is decide, what is this building made from? Is it timber or is it concrete or steel? And what kind of colors will I apply? Obviously, I can play around with the arrangement a little bit, but this type of architecture really is quite limited. I think it is possible to bring something else to the process that isn't too complicated, that will help you to end up with a space that has real character. Now, there's a couple of ways of doing it. I'll mention one just in passing, and then I'll get onto the main topic that I want to develop. Here's the one I'm going to mention in passing. If I look at this image here, I see an interesting space. It could be the entrance to a large concert hall, for example, one with a lot of character and excitement and cool colors and dramatic light. More than just your typical glass atrium, let's say. Now, this image happens to be taken from the inside of a violin. But it doesn't matter how the image is generated. All I have to do is I have to see its spatial potential. So I could take this image, and if you like, I could mold it to fit both with my grid organizing principle and my idea about the site. I could bring the three of them together so that in a way the recipe for the design becomes the spatial idea plus the grid concept plus the approach to the site. Now, this looks very simple, but of course there's always a little bit more to it than that. But what I want to do is I want to get on to my main topic, which is the idea of designing space through the use of the section drawing. Let's say I'm going to design a small library. Well, I'll start by drawing a desk with a book on it. And here's the person reading the book. So I ask myself, do they sit in a big room or in a small one? And if they're in a small one, are they alone, or is this a space, a room that can be shared with somebody else? Now, in this particular case, I might say, well, I'm going to let them sit on their own inside a little reading room, and so they can have peace and quiet and concentrate on their work. Now, the next question I might ask is, well, do they have a view? And in this case, well, I just might happen to say yes. I'll say, yeah, they have a view of nature, and they can enjoy that as they're reading. But if the view that they're enjoying is from a south-facing wall, well, then I'm going to have to make sure that they aren't bothered by direct sunlight. So I'm going to have to include various elements on this wall to control very strong light, even in Ireland. So I'll decide that perhaps the ceiling is going to be low in this space because I want to create a feeling of intimacy. And then I'm going to decide to put the bookshelves in this larger space, which is to the north of the reading space. Now, I'm going to make the reading space, or reading spaces, because there's going to be quite a few of these, perhaps a corridor of them, or two corridors perhaps. I'm going to make these reading spaces out of timber. And then the space where the bookshelves is, I'm going to make that out of concrete. And I'm going to bring light into the bookshelf area from openings in the roof. But I'm not going to bring it in quite as directly as this. Eventually, I'm going to try and control that light. So by using this section, to ask some basic questions about the user's experience. I bring a feeling of particularity to the space, which isn't instead of the grid, but is actually complementary. It's going to work with the grid. The two things are going to work together. So the library is beginning to feel to me like, if you like, my library, the library that I'm designing, the kind of library that I actually want to sit in or to make, not the one that I end up with just because I happen to be working with the grid. This approach is going to work for any type of space that you're asked to design, whether it's a school or a creche or a gym or an art gallery. You start off by drawing the user, and then you create the environment that the user is in by asking some very, very basic questions. Does the user have a view? Is there direct sunlight or no direct sunlight? Is there north light? Is the space made of timber? Is it made of concrete? Is it intimate or is it public? The hard part about architecture, about starting out in architecture, is proposing spaces, having the skill to be able to propose spaces. Drawing cool looking buildings, that's actually relatively easy to do. But to be able to propose a space, you have to have a technique. And the technique that I've just proposed is as good as any. Once you start practicing it, you'll begin to realize, yeah, I get the hang of it now. I'm able to make spaces. And once you can do that, then you can propose whatever space that you like. So that's it. Thank you.